On a recent stormy day, choppy waves crash into the Scripps Pier. This is probably what most people picture when they think of waves, but surface waves are not the only kind. Scripps Institution of Oceanography researcher Peter Franks is interested in waves beneath the surface, internal waves.
These are gigantic waves. I mean, if you could surf them, you'd surf for days very, very, very slowly.
Franks studies how phytoplankton interact with internal waves. Phytoplankton are the tiny, single-celled organisms that form the crucial base of the ocean's food chain. Internal waves can play a role in accumulations of plankton, such as red tides, which can sometimes be toxic. But Frank says piecing together exactly how this happens isn't easy.
Understanding these dynamics, they all come down to physics and chemistry and biological interactions, and that's really hard to understand in the oceans.
Sticking one scientific instrument underwater wouldn't provide a full picture of these ever-changing three-dimensional forces. Franks discussed this problem with another Scripps researcher, Jules Jaffe.
My laboratory is basically dedicated to building innovative, new, exciting instruments that allow us to discover things about the ocean.
Jaffe and Franks knew that what they needed was robotic plankton. Not just one robot, but many of them. In a new study out this week, they and their colleagues described the system of underwater automatons they built to tackle this problem.
These are actually scientific instruments that we can deploy in swarms.
This swarm of robots is capable of working underwater for hours, collecting data for a dynamic view of complicated ocean interactions.
And what we can do is watch the whole group, and therefore we get information about the three-dimensional structure of the ocean, so that we're not sampling just a point, we're sampling all those points, and the coherent sort of movements of those is giving us unique information that people have never had before.
The robots are each about the size and shape of a coffee can. They're colored bright yellow to make them easy to spot in the water. Franks thinks these squat yellow cylinders kind of look like the minions from the animated Despicable Me movies.
All they need are some overalls and some glasses and a big smile, and they'd be perfect. If we could make the little hydrophone on them go beedoo-beedoo or something like that, it would be great.
Banana! Banana!
In all seriousness, Frank says these robots are really helping to advance his research. A 5-hour test off the coast of Torrey Pines provided real-world confirmation of his theories about internal waves and the formation of plankton patches. For that test, Scripps researchers drove a boat out to sea and dropped 16 robots into the water, letting them dive to a pre-programmed depth. A larger piece of equipment floated on the ocean's surface and sent pings down to the robots below. Once the robots were retrieved, those signals were used to plot the movements of each robot. Studying internal waves and plankton accumulation might sound pretty technical, but Frank says it's vital for understanding bigger facts about life on Earth.
Every second breath you take is courtesy of the phytoplankton. The oxygen that you are breathing is coming from the phytoplankton out there. And a third of that oxygen is made by phytoplankton that we didn't even know existed 30 years ago.
Underwater robots are not new, but Jules Jaffe says this swarm system does open up new possibilities by bringing together so many small robots to continuously and simultaneously record data underwater. He says these robots might prove to be useful for listening to blue whales or tracking underwater oil spills.
One of the things that was really scary about the Deepwater Horizon disaster was whether that oil was drifting to the coast of Florida.
Maybe these robots could have helped predict the movement of that oil. However researchers end up using them, Jaffe is excited to see what happens when these swarms multiply. David Wagner, KPBS News.